One has a massive quad-core processor, a beautiful Full HD display, and is packed through the roof full of features. The other has a Touch ID fingerprint reader, super awesome slow-mo, and has brought 64-bit technology over to the smartphone world. But what is the better choice for you? Let's find out as we take two of the hottest smartphones of 2013 and smash them head-to-head, the iPhone 5s versus the Galaxy S4. Today's video is made possible by Squarespace. What is good, tech people? It's Jonathan here with TLD. Hope you guys are doing well. I am super excited to bring this comparison to you guys. It took a little longer than I would have hoped for because what ends up being a 10 to 20 minute product in the end result takes hours upon hours of preparation beforehand. But regardless, I am finished, happy to put the TLD stamp on it, and we are good to go. Now, to preface this video, the Galaxy S4 was my daily driver for a longer period of time, more so than any other phone this year. And I actually hadn't used an iPhone for all of 2013 until I switched back to the iPhone 5s for the review. But needless to say, with the time I spent on both phones, I'm comfortable enough and I feel confident in bringing you a really thorough analysis and comparisons of these two phones. Now, both of these are AT&T models, and the reason I'm not using a Google Play Edition Galaxy S4 is because, especially with the holidays coming up, I know a lot of you may be considering one of these phones as an upgrade or a purchase, and because of that, the majority of the consumers out there will be looking for a carrier model. That is what this video is geared to help out with. Now, to kick things off, I generally like to start out comparisons with how the phone looks, how it feels, how the actual build quality is. And the iPhone 5s, aside from a couple new colors, space gray, which replaces slate, and a new gold color, which is actually more of a champagne, the overall design hasn't changed at all from the iPhone 5. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing because a lot of the tweaks and changes happened under the hood of the iPhone 5s, and there were some pretty significant bumps. But with that said, the iPhone 5 and obviously now 5s, alongside the HTC One, are two of my favorite built phones, period. The iPhone 5s has a two-tone back, part glass, part aluminum. It's super thin, super light, and has an insane amount of attention to detail and precision. It feels solid in your hand, and overall, it's just a really classy looking phone, but that design does come with some negatives. As premium and as well built as the iPhone 5s feels, it does have a sense of fragilness to it, especially with part of the back having glass. You drop that sucker on the right place, it will definitely crack or even shatter. Now, with space gray replacing slate, it does do a better job of resisting scratches and scuffs, but more than likely, unless you are really careful or keep it in a case or a protective cover, then more than likely you are going to end up with a scuff or some kind of nick on the back of this phone. The Galaxy S4, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite, where it's got a lot of heat for being a flagship phone without flagship build quality. It's all plastic, and there's something about it, I can't really put my finger on it, but it kind of has almost a slippery, greasy feeling to it. Even the edges aren't aluminum or metal, it's kind of a coated plastic, so there's definitely a lot to be desired, but it doesn't ruin the phone or feel bad by any means. It's just not what you'd expect on a premium flagship phone. Now, conversely, that plasticky design does come with benefits, the first of which being a removable plastic back, which gives you access to a removable, swappable battery, and expansion via micro SD card up to an extra 64 gigabytes of storage. So next up, I want to talk about pricing and storage. So for both phones, they start out at 16 gigabytes, and for a typical 2-year US contract, you're looking at $199 each. Now, obviously, pricing fluctuates. There's deals, there's sales. Currently, Amazon has the Galaxy S4 for $99 on a new 2-year contract, and surprisingly, AT&T is doing the same thing in store with the iPhone 5s for the same $99.99 on a new 2-year contract. Now, again, those prices might go up, they might change. I do not know how long they might last, so for the absolute most up-to-date pricing and availability on both these and unlocked phones of both the iPhone 5s and the Galaxy S4, make sure to check out the links down below. Jumping back to storage, the iPhone 5s goes all the way up to a 64 gigabyte version, whereas the Galaxy S4 only goes up to a 32 gigabyte option. You do, however, like I talked about, have the option for micro SD card expandability, so you can get an extra 64 gigabytes for much cheaper on the Galaxy S4. To put things into perspective, for that 64 gigabyte model iPhone 5s, you are paying an extra $200, whereas the Galaxy S4, for a 64 gigabyte micro SD card, you're only paying about $50 to add that on top of the initial 16 gigabytes. Now, conversely, if you only need like an extra 32 gigabytes, you can add that onto your Galaxy S4 for $24 right now. So again, if you are interested in the market for any of those micro SD cards, I will have a few of my favorite options linked down below. Now, with all that said, it really comes down to how you use your phone. Me personally, I use a lot of streaming applications, so Spotify, Netflix, YouTube, and those don't really require me to need a whole lot of storage, so really 16 or 32 gigabytes really does the job for me. On the other hand, if you need that physical storage or offline media for music, for photos, for video, then the Galaxy S4 might be a better option for you to consider. So next up, let's go ahead and talk about screens, because to me that is a huge factor and deciding point in why you might choose one phone over the other. The iPhone 5S features a smaller 4-inch display with a resolution of 1136 by 640, so it's kind of random. Apple is definitely that kid who makes up his own rules in games and kind of makes everybody else play by them. The Galaxy S4, on the other hand, features a bigger 4.99-inch display, which is rounded up to 5 inches, at a full 1920 by 1080p resolution. Now, as far as consuming media goes, whether that's watching video, browsing the web, looking at pictures, or reading, I prefer the bigger, higher resolution display on the Galaxy S4 over the iPhone 5S. Now, I will say, even though the iPhone 5S has a lower resolution screen compared to the Galaxy S4, in terms of actual display quality, I have zero complaints. It is a beautiful and sharp looking display. And actually, as much as I enjoy the bigger, higher resolution Galaxy S4 display, something about the color just doesn't sit right with me. Out of the box, it is completely oversaturated. I know you can adjust that to a more neutral color, but something about the tint or the hue just kind of seems off to me, and I never really got used to it or really fully liked it. So I will say, as far as viewing angles and overall color accuracy, the iPhone 5S edges the Galaxy S4 in that regards, but overall, because I'm not really editing photo or video on my phones for a real scenario, I think the overall enjoyment of the bigger, higher resolution display outweighs that, and that's why I prefer the bigger display on the Galaxy S4 over the iPhone 5S. Now, with all that said, I do want to get this out there and make this very clear. Just because you or I may prefer a bigger screen on a smartphone, it doesn't make anybody who prefers a smaller screen stupid, or it doesn't make the iPhone screen suck. It comes down to personal preference, and it's the same exact reason why someone may choose a 13-inch laptop over a 17-inch laptop. It comes down to what suits you best. They might like having a smaller, more compact screen on their phone and going towards a tablet for a bigger option. Now, next up, we're going to talk about the performance and processors on both of these phones. It actually might surprise you. On paper, if you were looking at both of these phones, you probably wouldn't give the iPhone 5S a chance. It's rocking a dual-core 1.3 GHz processor with 1 GB of RAM, whereas the Galaxy S4 is rocking a massive quad-core CPU with 2 gigs of RAM. Now, traditionally, Apple has done an excellent job of showing that it's not always about how many cores, how high the clock speed is, how many gigs of RAM, unless the software is optimized to use all that hardware power. As you can see here, the A7 chip in the iPhone 5S is a perfect example of that. Even though it's dual-core, it is outperforming the quad-core CPU in the Galaxy S4 in Geekbench 3. As we jump over to GFX Bench, which is going to translate over to gaming performance, in both 2.7 and the 2.5 tests for both on-screen and off-screen tests, the iPhone 5S again outperforms the Galaxy S4. Now, especially with some of the stuff Samsung has pulled with benchmarks, I usually take them with a grain of salt, and I would advise you to never, ever base your buying decision off of benchmarks. It really comes down to how a phone performs in everyday situations, and I can tell you from experience, both of these phones are ridiculously fast. As far as gaming goes, both the iPhone 5S and the Galaxy S4 shred through games, and both kind of have pros and cons. The iPhone 5S obviously does have better performance, but I wish I could take advantage of all that power on a bigger, higher resolution screen. The Galaxy S4, while you do have a bigger, beautiful, full HD display to take advantage of those games, the actual app and game selection is limited compared to the iPhone 5S. Not to say that the Play Store offering is bad, because it has gotten tremendously better, but most of the latest and exclusive games are on iOS first, and you usually have to wait a longer period of time before you get them on Android. For example, the iPhone 5S has Infinity Blade 3, which is taking advantage of that 64-bit processor. You have Plants vs. Zombies 2, whereas you're still stuck with Plants vs. Zombie 1 on the Play Store. So both kind of have their pros and cons. I really enjoy the overall gaming experience on a bigger screen on the Galaxy S4, but I really enjoy the overall game and app selection on iOS and the App Store on the iPhone 5S. So moving on, let's go and talk about exclusive features. And these are the features that Apple and Samsung are going to market to you to say, hey, this is what separates this phone from the other, and this is why you should buy me. The Galaxy S4, aside from the display, really comes down to Samsung's software features. So AirPlay, AirView, Smart Stay, Smart Scroll, all of those are what Samsung is pushing towards you. The iPhone 5S, obviously, aside from the A7 processor, which we did talk about, is really focused on the Touch ID fingerprint reader. Now, most of those Galaxy S4 features can be viewed as gimmicky, and I personally didn't use a whole lot of them. Smart Stay is where you're watching the screen. It'll actually watch for your eyes, so if you look away, it's going to pause the video. You look back, it's going to play. You can wave your fingers up or down to scroll through a web page, or wave them left and right to switch between tabs, and it works really awesome. The problem is, though, is that it only works on Samsung's stock web browser, not anything like Chrome. So if you do want to use a third-party web browser, that will not apply to it. What I did find really useful is actually how you can move application from page to page in the Galaxy S4. And anybody who's done this on any smartphone can probably relate to my frustration. You have it ready to move, you're dragging it, you're almost there, and you fail and you're back to square one. With the Galaxy S4, you get it ready to move, you can actually swipe back and forth without touching it from page to page, select where you want to put it, and bam, it is good to go. Insanely awesome feature. And the fact that the Galaxy S4 has a built-in TV tuner is awesome. That is something you will clearly not find on the iPhone 5S. Setup is super easy. It works with any TV, any cable box, and it's a really convenient and handy feature to have with your smartphone because you carry it so often. The iPhone 5S, on the other hand, as far as features go, they are really putting their stock into the processor, which we already talked about, the camera, which I will touch on shortly, and last but not least, the Touch ID fingerprint reader, which works really well. Now, just like I talked about in my iPhone 5S review, which if you did miss, by the way, I'll have it linked down below, Apple did not, and I repeat, did not invent nor claim to invent fingerprint reader technology into the smartphone. We actually saw it a couple years back on the Motorola Atrix. It really wasn't done that well. What Apple did was buy and acquire the technology from a third-party company and then implement it into the iPhone 5S. So how it works is it's actually built into the home button. So if you don't see that square that we've seen on previous iPhones, that's why it looks different. You can store up to 5 different fingerprints, whether that's your significant other, your kids, your family, basically anybody who you want to grant access to your phone. And it's one of those things where if you've never used it before, you really wouldn't miss it or need it. But once you've used it on an everyday basis and it becomes second nature, you really start to appreciate how useful it is. And on top of that, you can actually use it to verify purchases in iTunes or the App Store. So instead of entering your password to confirm a purchase, bam, enter your fingerprint and you are good to go. So next up, let's go and talk about cameras. And while they haven't replaced a DSLR or point and shoot, camera technology has evolved enough where most people don't need to carry an extra device, and it is good enough for most everyday photos. The iPhone 5S, again, is showing why it's not always about numbers or specs, is rocking an 8 megapixel camera, where the Galaxy S4 is rocking a massive 13 megapixel camera. The iPhone 5S is going a little more towards the HTC One route, where they're focusing on actual pixel size as opposed to number of megapixels, and that's going to equate to better low light performance. And for the most part, the iPhone 5S does do a better job in low light photos. As far as the actual interface goes, I would say for most people, the Galaxy S4 camera interface is more intuitive. It's a little easier to access everything. You just literally hit the record button for a video. You're not having to switch between tabs. And for the most part, picture quality between both devices is pretty close. I really wouldn't say you'd be disappointed with either of these phones. One feature that I really like on the Galaxy S4 is you can actually use a voice command to activate the camera. So you can say cheese, and it'll take a picture.
Say cheese.
Now, both phones do offer a burst mode, although the iPhone 5S does do a better job. On the Galaxy S4, it's not enabled by default. You have to actually go into the menu to enable it, and it actually taps out at 20 photos. The iPhone 5S, on the other hand, is pretty much 10 frames per second for as long as you hold down the camera button. I know there is technically a limit to it, but it's something ridiculously high. So in that aspect, the iPhone 5S edges out the Galaxy S4. Now jumping over to video, one thing I absolutely love about the iPhone 5S is its slow motion capabilities. And before someone says, wait, Jonathan, the Galaxy S4 also has slow motion video, they're actually kind of different. The way it works on the Galaxy S4 is you actually have to select how slow you want the clip, then you record it, and then it will actually slow it down automatically down to a resolution where it kind of looks like it was filmed with a potato. How it works on the iPhone 5S is it'll shoot 120 frames per second at 720p resolution, and it actually allows you to choose which part of the clip you want to slow down after the fact, whether that's your phone or in an outside video editing application like Final Cut Pro 10 or Adobe Premiere. These are actually slow motion shots from my full iPhone 5S review, so if you want to check those out in their full entirety, I'll have that full review annotated somewhere up here and also linked down below for your viewing convenience. Now, of course, both do shoot 1080p video. Both are pretty on par as far as that goes. Here's the iPhone 5S, looks good. Now we jump over to the Galaxy S4. Again, it looks solid. So in terms of actual 1080p video, both of these phones do a solid job. One edge the Galaxy S4 does have over the iPhone 5S is its front-facing camera shoots full 1080p as opposed to 720p on the iPhone 5S, and you can actually use both the front and rear-facing cameras on the Galaxy S4 at the same time. Not sure how useful that is to some people, but I just thought I would let you know. Next up, I want to compare the speakers on both phones, and to put it bluntly, neither are great and don't compare to the HTC One, but nonetheless, here's the iPhone 5S. And here's the Galaxy S4. Now to me, the placement of the speaker on the Galaxy S4 was poorly executed. It's on the back side, and the way I recorded those tests was kind of how you would hold the phone when you're consuming media. So before anybody screams, that is not fair, you should have turned the Galaxy S4 around, I am thinking more in practical use, and when you're watching a video or watching a movie, you're not going to have the phone facing away from you. With that said, neither are great. The iPhone 5S is slightly better with a little more low end, but neither are going to replace an external speaker solution. Moving on from speakers, let's go and talk about battery life, and both were pretty much about on par. I could get through a full day with both phones. Neither were great, neither were atrocious. Both did a solid job. Now again, with these two phones, there kind of seems to be a theme. There's both pros and cons to really each device. The Galaxy S4, like I talked about, does have a removable back, which gives you access to a different battery. So if you do have an extra battery with the Galaxy S4 and your phone dies, it's as easy as changing out the battery and bam, you are recharged 100%. The iPhone 5S, on the other hand, while you are stuck with an internal battery, maybe you really don't like the idea of carrying around or charging up a second battery. One advantage of the iPhone 5S over the Galaxy S4 is actually how much faster the phone charges, and it's actually a pretty big difference. So kind of take that into consideration. If you like the idea of having a second battery, then the Galaxy S4 is probably a better option. For me, because I usually have multiple devices on me and I'm switching out back and forth, I usually have an external battery. Right now I'm using the Nutrient iCarrier, which packs an insane 12,000 milliamp hours of power, so I can recharge pretty much anything. This one is a little pricier, but for the money it does a killer job, and they do have other smaller capacity options at lower price points, so I will have this and other cheaper models linked down below. So overall, I think we covered quite a bit between these two phones, and I think I'm going to close this video out on things that I like about the Galaxy S4 and things that I like about the iPhone 5S. With the Galaxy S4 and Android, you have a lot more control and customization over your phone. So to me, where customization really stands out is actually one complaint that I have about the iPhone 5S, and that is actually animations between switching applications. On the iPhone 5S, you can choose either from a window animation, which is kind of annoying, or a fade transition, which is better, but it still doesn't eliminate what I dislike about it. Either way, you have to wait for the animation to complete before you can do anything. So for example, if I'm going from Safari back to my home screen, if I try to swipe over to the next page before that animation completes, I cannot do anything. Now the Galaxy S4, while by default it does have similar animations which cause some of the Samsung TouchWiz lag, but because you have customization, you can actually go into enable developer options and turn all those animations off, so it is instantaneous. Bam! You're jumping between windows. It is buttery smooth and super quick. On top of that, you can customize your home screen to how you like it. So whether you want to put a launcher on there, you want to add a widget, a battery indicator, you want to keep it minimal, not a whole lot going on, it is up to you. I've also really grown to like the ability to switch keyboards on Android. With the iPhone 5S, you're kind of stuck with what Apple gives you. On the Galaxy S4, I installed SwiftKey, which I absolutely love. And not only does it do swipe typing, but it also adapts to how you text, to how you talk, and it starts to learn your style. So you end up saving a whole lot of time when typing. And once I got used to that, I had a really hard time going back to the keyboard on the iPhone 5S. Now jumping back to the iPhone 5S, and what I like there, I really enjoyed the super fast processor, and surprisingly, the M7 coprocessor, which I really didn't talk a whole lot, is really awesome. That is actually a separate processor dedicated for motion, and it works really well with fitness tracking and walking applications. So Argus on the iPhone 5S is one of those applications that takes advantage of the M7 coprocessor. It is insanely accurate and something that I used every day. I do enjoy the overall app selection and game selection on iOS and the App Store, and that's really something, again, where if you never used it or experienced it, you really wouldn't appreciate it. And again, there are certain applications like Tweetbot or Infinity Blade or Argus, or applications that use that M7 coprocessor that I simply cannot get on the Galaxy S4. On top of that, I really enjoy iMessage. It works really well talking from phone to computers or talking to my nephews or nieces who have iPod touches. I know there is Hangouts on Android and it does work pretty well, but from my experience in actually trying to talk to my nephews, installing that application on their iPod touch, iMessages seem to work better. So as you can see, both have their pros and cons. It really comes down to what suits your lifestyle better and really what ecosystem are you heavily invested in. Hopefully this video helped ease your decision between these two phones. If it did and you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button. It is much appreciated. And as always, in return, I will throw a virtual high five at your face. Now before I hop out of here, I want to give a huge shout out to Squarespace for making this video possible. So if you guys have been looking to create your own tech blog or website to go along with your YouTube channel, Squarespace is hands down the easiest and simplest way to do that. They have over 20 customizable templates, everything is drag and drop and super easy to navigate. It doesn't matter if you're on your desktop, your laptop, your smartphone or tablet, everything is optimized to look good automatically. They have an awesome 24/7 support team based out of New York City, and pricing starts out at just $8 a month with a free domain if you sign up for a year. So again, if you guys have been looking to create your own website and you enjoy the content that I put out, especially these videos that take a ton of time to produce, you guys can support the channel by using the offer code TLD11 at checkout, and that'll get you a free trial, no credit card required. So again, if you want to support the channel and score an awesome deal, definitely check out the link down below. Aside from that, thank you guys very much for watching. It is much appreciated. As I close this video out, I want to leave you with this. I see a lot of people get crazy in comments and literally hate on people who don't like the smartphone that they like, and it's absolutely crazy. We are definitely fortunate, and it is no doubt a first world problem to have to choose between something like the iPhone 5S or the Galaxy S4. So with that said, if you guys can keep it civil and give me an insightful answer on which you prefer, the iPhone 5S or the Galaxy S4, I would absolutely love to hear your opinion. So definitely drop me a line down below. If you guys have any questions on phones or tech in general, definitely hit me up on Twitter, Facebook, or Google+. They're all linked down below, along with the gear that I use to make these videos. Again, this is Jonathan with TLD, and I will see you guys later.